sermons, right? You guys have heard me preach enough. You know that some sermons they make you feel good. Some sermons you leave feeling inspired, and some sermons sort of make your head hurt and you have to follow along really closely. Today's sermon is the latter. It's more of a heady sermon, so I'm just giving you fair warning. To encourage you not to fall asleep, that you're going to have to follow me from the beginning to the end, whatever. Despite the fact that we are going to start off with a comic strip. So this pretty much sums up the standard secular view of getting into heaven, right? St. Peter is safeguarding the integrity and the sanctity of heaven by verifying that your name is indeed written in the book of life by the blood of the Lamb. In other words, you're on the nice list. And upon verification of your admittance into heaven, St. Peter ushers you through the pearly gates. First stop, angel fitting kiosk. You're all set, and you made it. Now, we all know that this image is fictitious. The pearly gates and the golden inlaid roads and the bedazzled castles are much more akin to the realm of the Wizard of Oz rather than the kingdom of the Lamb of God. However, it's also true that in the book of Revelation, which we read from today, the book of Revelation holds a lot of these same images. There are 12 gates made of pearl. And there are city walls adorned with every imaginable jewel. There's like emeralds and onyx and amethyst. If you go in there, there's like this very, very, very long list of all the jewels that are there. And the streets are paved with gold, transparent as glass. So all that's there, and we don't say that the book of Revelation is fiction. We say it's very confusing, but we don't necessarily say that it's fiction. We are enlightened enough in our modern thinking to know that there's more to heaven than puffy clouds and harp music. But this glorious cityscape still holds a lot of sway in our minds. And additionally, it would be sort of awesome if that was true, right? If all this laid out was true. And who am I to say that it's not? I haven't personally been to heaven. Or have I? See, it's one thing to think that God is preparing a place for us in a far-off place. And I always hope that in this far-off place, my house will be situated next to the bike path so I can go running, and I'll have a nice pool and a luxurious bed. But it is an entirely different thing to look at the very place in which we live and get ready for God to come here. That this will be transformed into heaven. I mean, because when I look around, it's a big, giant mess. All of the injustices, the indecencies, and the problems which exist aren't very heaven-like. So it is no wonder that escapism theology has such a grip on our world. Heaven should be a place of safety, affluence, and beauty. And this doesn't look anything like that. So it's reasonable to think or hope, at least, that we would get to go someplace else. We would get to go someplace else to reach it. But Revelation clearly states that this world is where God desires to reside, and that heaven is coming here. God has some sort of strange affinity for this place that we call earth. For God, heaven and earth are and will be one, no longer separated by a curtain or veil or by gates or walls. Easter solidified that truth for us. Now, before I go on, I want to talk about that concept for a moment, because it's crucial to our glimpsing of this new heaven and new earth. One of the passages that we read on Good Friday states, "Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from the top to the bottom." So that veil or curtain of separation between God and humanity was destroyed at Easter. And it's also important to note that curtain that hung in the temple was human-made. And when that human-made curtain was ripped, it was ripped from the top to the bottom, as if to signify that God no longer is allowing there to be any separation between humanity and God, or between humanity and heaven. Heaven was made available to us at Easter in Jesus. no gatekeepers standing guard, no hoops through which to jump, and no gates through which to pass. But as you'll remember in the beginning, I talked about there are 12 gates, 12 of them, in the book of Revelation, in the city of God. I mean, that is a lot of fortification. Surely, those are designed to separate the good from the bad, to let some in and to keep some out, to ensure protection and safekeeping from the forces of evil. That's what walls and gates do. But there's also this small detail that's not, if you read down a few more verses in Revelation, it's not included in our reading, but it's just a little bit farther down. And it says that the gates of the city of God will never shut. They'll never shut. Specifically in Revelation it says, "And the city has no need for sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it." And here's the important part. "The gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there." So if there's no night, and the gates will never be shut during the day, then this new city of God will never be closed off to anyone or from anything. Anyone can enter at any time. So like in my mind, God just has a really good exterior decorator or something. But the truth is, God has a lot of confidence in this open borders concept, so much so that he has staken his very life on it. Now I know, in today's political climate, as soon as I say open borders, y'all conjure up something different than what I'm actually trying to state. I'm not trying to make a political stance, but proclaim a theological truth. It is clear that in God's vision, segregation, separation, and division have no place in this new world that God is dreaming of. And this point of construction matters a lot as we consider our role in resurrecting earth. We are really good builders of walls, and we are good keepers of gates, and we are good fortifiers against our enemies. But what if in doing so, what if in being such good builders, we are escaping heaven? Now, as I said, you gotta hang with me, so just hang on. I want you to hear me out for a moment. I'm not talking about escaping eternal life. And I'm not talking about your escaping your heavenly home. All of that is promised to us in Jesus. But I'm talking about now. I'm talking about maybe we accidentally escape the bits of heaven that are available to us now. Earlier, I talked about how escapism theology can be alluring, mostly because of the question of why. Why is our earth like this? Why are all these things happening? And we want something better, and this isn't the better that we're hoping for. But if you flip it around and you say, what if I have been to heaven, and heaven is here? I mean, if that could be true, and if we don't embrace that, we end up escaping the pieces of heaven available to us now. In our very polarized society, Jesus calls us to cross invisible walls that quarantine us from, all the others in the political party, or that other denomination or faith tradition, or that other ethnicity, or that other socioeconomic class, or that other race, or the other, sexual preference, all those people. And Jesus doesn't call us just to cross those fences because he's a nice guy, but because he knows that by breaking down walls, then we enter heaven. And closer to home, which is sometimes much easier for most of us to deal with, Jesus calls us to cross those invisible walls that separate us from those who we have hurt and those who have hurt us, those in our families with whom we disagree. Because, not just because Jesus is a nice guy, but because there's something of heaven to be found in those that are different from us. So that means if heaven is here, it doesn't look at all like I thought it was going to look. It doesn't look much like that. It doesn't look like the city's laid with gold. I don't actually think it looks like God wants it to look like yet either. But God knows that it will look like what God dreams it can be. Now, this may sound somewhat sacrilegious and may even seem to work in opposition to how we've understood heaven. But ultimately, I don't believe faith is about who's going to heaven at all, just as faith isn't about who's going to earth. Rather, what Revelation points to is a reality of heaven, a reality that those living on earth can create this heaven with God with an open gate policy. See, St. Peter, he's not a gatekeeper, he's a host and a welcomer. When Peter was alive, as we read in Acts today, when Peter crossed over the invisible boundaries that he and society had constructed, that was when Peter truly understood that God shows no favoritism. So as we look around this heaven that we inhabit today, this is heaven now, we realize that there are people that we don't like in heaven. But God apparently loves them. And there are also people that we don't think deserve to be here in heaven with us. But God apparently believes in them and also believes in us. Often, when I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to talk about, I have a few angle possibilities for each sermon, right? A few questions that come up as I'm reading the readings. And one of them this week was, what does it even mean for God to come live with us? Which I think is an intriguing question, and it's raised in the verses today, but the truth is God has already come to live with us. So I think the more appropriate question would be, what would it look like if we let God live through us? And I think the answer to that question would be, I think heaven would happen. See, the book of Revelation has often been peddled as a vision of end times, rather than what it actually is, a vision of new beginnings. Whatever you have been told about heaven and the end of your life, the end of time, the end of the world, Jesus passionately reminds us to live like the end is here, now and today. Because in doing so, then heaven can truly be on earth.